welcome to Commerce Professionals. The topic for today's discussion is demand and its determinants. First of all, we must understand the meaning of demand. What is demand? Demand is an economic principle referring to consumers' desire to purchase goods and services and their willingness to pay a price for a specific good or services. It is basically when we want a commodity, but only wanting the commodity does not mean it is demand. Demand must include want along with two other characteristics. First is want for a commodity, that is desire for a commodity. Second is means to buy the commodity. That means if we have the resources enough so that we can buy the commodity. And third is the readiness to spend the means, which is the most important thing in demand if we are willing enough to spend those resources in buying that commodity. Then comes the meaning of quantity demanded. Quantity demanded refers to the number of goods a buyer is willing to buy at a given price. So there is a demand schedule in front of the screen. At price 10, the quantity demanded is 0. At price 8, the quantity demanded is 2 units. At price 6, quantity demanded is 4 units, and so on. So basically, quantity demanded is when we have a number of goods as against the price for which we are going to buy the thing. Then there comes the demand curve. As you can see, the demand curve is a downward sloping demand curve. This is a DD demand curve and which is made on the basis of the demand schedule given at the right corner of the screen. That is the price and quantity. Price, it keeps on falling from 10 to 8 to 6 to 4 to 2 to 0, and the quantity is increasing, that is from 0 to 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 and for 10. When we plot the graph, when we plot the demand schedule on the graph, that becomes our demand curve. And this demand curve shows us the relationship between price and quantity. And the negative slope means here the price and quantity demanded are inversely related. Then comes the determinants of demand. We have considered that price affects demand. In the previous slide, we understand that price and demand are negatively related to each other. So demand is affected by price, but there are certain other determinants in spite of demand, in spite of price that affects the demand, and those are the determinants of demand. Firstly, price of a commodity, which we have briefly discussed. Then is income of the consumer. Then price of related goods. Here, related goods means two types of goods: substitute goods and complementary goods. The discussion about related goods will be done in the upcoming 2 minutes. Then is tastes and preferences of consumers. And lastly is the consumer expectations. We will discuss all these determinants one by one. First is price of a commodity. So law of demand, which is indicated through the demand curve, law of demand states that with the fall in price, the demand will increase and vice versa, which means that with the rise in price, the demand will fall. So here, people will base their purchasing decisions on the price. And we consider that all the other things are constant. All the other things are not affecting the demand. Here, the demand curve shows the relationship, which I have already discussed with you, and the elastic demand implies a robust changed quantity accompanied by change in price, which means that if there is change in price, the demand will also change. So, price of a commodity is the most important determinant of demand. With the change in price, the demand changes, as we have seen in the demand curve. Second is income of the consumer. So income of the consumer is the second determinant of demand. Increase in income leads to increase in the capacity of the buyer to buy that thing. So we can say that income and demand are positively related. If my income has been increased, my capacity to buy the commodity will also increase. And similarly, if my income is decreased, that becomes my demand will also decrease as my consumption pattern will be affected. When income rises, the quantity demanded will be rises. So we can say there would be a positive relation, and these two charts will help us in understanding if my income increase, then what happens to the demand curve, and if my income falls, then what happens to the demand curve. As we can see in the first picture, when my income has been increased, so price is still the same, but due to increase in my income, I would be buying more units of a commodity. So quantity will increase, and that will shift my demand curve from DD to D1 D-word, and this becomes the rightward shift. Vice versa, with the fall in income, the price is still the same, but my capacity to buy the thing will decrease. In that case, the quantity will decrease. And when the quantity will decrease, the demand curve will shift from D to D dash. That would be a leftward shift. Third is the price of related goods. As I have briefly discussed, related goods are of two types. One is complementary goods. Complementary goods are those goods which complete each other, which are incomplete without each other. Just in the case, we can say car and petrol. These two things are complementary goods. Without one, other is incomplete. Second is substitute goods. Substitute goods are those goods which can be used, which can be replaced by one another, which can be used in place of one another. So, substitute goods, the example would be tea and coffee. So when we want to understand the price of related goods, we should understand what is complementary goods and what are substitute goods. In case of complementary goods, if the price of one product will increase, that will decrease the demand of other complementary product. For example, if the price of petrol will increase, the consumer will see that the prices are increasing. So they will try to shift their demand. They will try to decrease the demand of buying a car. This is why, because these two goods are complementary in nature. And the price of And with the increase in the price of petrol, as you can see, the price of the car is not increased. So in the first picture, in the case of complementary goods, the price of the car will remain same. But due to increase in the price of the petrol, the demand for the car will decrease. And then the demand curve will shift from D to D dash. That would be a leftward shift. On the other hand, in the case of substitute goods, the increase in the product of one product will increase the demand for the substitute product. Like if the price of tea will rise, that means people will shift their demand from tea to coffee because the coffee price is still the same. And in that case, when the price of coffee is same, the quantity of coffee will be increasing. And that is why the demand curve will shift from DD to D1 D1, implying a rightward shift. Then we have taste and preferences of the consumer. So the demand is also affected by the people's desires, emotions, and preferences. If my preference and taste are in favor of that product, my demand will increase. My demand curve will shift from DD to D1 D1, a rightward shift. While if my taste and preferences are against the product, then in that case my demand will decrease and it will imply a leftward shift from D to D dash. Last but not the least is consumer expectations. Consumer expectations involve the expectation of a consumer regarding increase or decrease in price of a commodity in future. If I know that the price of a particular product will increase in future, in that case my current demand would increase. In that case, the DD curve will shift from DD to D1 D1. That will be a rightward shift. That means if I am having expectation of rise in prices in future, currently my demand would increase. On the other hand, if I'm expecting the prices would fall in the coming future, in that case, I would not be buying the same commodity currently. In that case, my demand would decrease and the demand curve would shift from D to D dash. That would be a left to watch it. So that's all for today. That these are the determinants of demand.